Hi, Michael. He is 28 years old. I would have laughed incredulously if you had told me a few years ago that one person's deceit would force me to lose everything I ever cared about. That is exactly what happened to me, though, and I am here to tell the tale of how my stepbrother Eric flipped my life upside down. 10 years old is when it all started. My mom and I were left alone to negotiate the world together after my dad died abruptly. We were close, most likely closer than most moms and sons. I belonged to her. She was my rock. Though everything wasn't perfect, we made life work. Then, when I was 14, my mother met Paul, the man she finally married. Paul was at least initially pleasant enough. He treated us nicely. I considered perhaps he could be the father figure I never had. One problem, though, was Paul had a boy named Eric, my age, from a prior marriage. Now, I'm not sure how to explain this, but everything changed as soon as Eric started living with us. Unlike me, he was direct, defiant, and quite disrespectful. Though Eric didn't give a damn about it, I attempted to be the decent son, the one who would fit with my new family. He made it abundantly evident from the start that he wanted me nowhere around. At first, I couldn't grasp it. I considered perhaps he was simply experiencing some phase, the typical teenage experience. But it was not long before it was abundantly evident that Eric wanted not to be my brother. He hardly wanted me in the same house either. He would find means to make my life unpleasant whenever my mother was not around. Should I have done something wrong, it was always my fault. Should anything vanish, he would attribute it to me. Though I had not personally touched anything, I was the one who broke it. It made no difference how hard I tried to explain. Paul consistently supported Eric. My mother first tried to be the arbiter. She would defend me, tell Eric he was being illogical. Still, she stopped as time passed. She wanted to stop fighting with Paul and avoid making things more difficult for me by keeping challenging his son. My mother's support started to wane gradually. The more she chose to ignore Eric's actions, the more alone I felt. I recall sitting in my room wishing that one day things would improve. Nevertheless, they never did. As we both got older, the situation deteriorated. I put a lot of effort into earning good marks, was accepted into a prominent university on a scholarship, and worked part-time to help myself. I resolved not to allow the turmoil in my house to define me. Eric, though? Eric paid no attention to academics. He has a trust fund created for him by his grandparents, as well as a college fund. A kind one as well, $100,000. Still, he appeared unconcerned about it. He wasted his time, drank, and was constantly running afoul of rules. Watching was annoying since I had worked so hard to reach where I was. Then, though, something occurred that I never would have seen coming and would fundamentally alter everything. One evening when I arrived home, Paul was pacing the living room, his face flushed with rage. Eric was nowhere to be seen. Paul accused me right away of something I could not even understand. "Where is Michael's money?" His voice shaking with anger. He questioned, "What have you done with the college fund for Eric?" To start with, I was perplexed. What he was talking about eluded me, not even sure where Eric's college fund was held, let alone how to get at it. Still, that was of little relevance. Paul was firmly set in his thinking. Eric entered the room with an innocent expression before I could reply. Then everything changed exactly like that. Eric continued, his voice hard and calculated. "Michael did it. He grabbed the account data by breaking into Dad's office. He took money from my education fund. I watched him go through it. My heart fell. What I was hearing defies belief. The room seemed to be whirling, and the planet felt as though it was falling around me. Paul's eyes veered between Eric and me, his face a mix of amazement and incredulity. With a faltering voice, he added, "Michael, how could you do this to us? You knew how much money Eric valued. From your own family, how could you steal?" Speechless, I stood there trying to make sense of it. This went beyond a mere allegation. Eric had created a whole narrative to suit me as the villain. Even Paul felt it without any proof. He had created a deception so convincing and sophisticated, and that was the insight I had. I was never going to win in this family, no matter how hard I tried. At last, my mother, who had been sitting silently in the background, spoke up. She only shook her head, though, not defending me. Her voice full of uncertainty, she continued gently, "I don't know what to believe anymore. Eric's son, Michael, is mine. Now that you are an adult, I cannot keep on your behalf fighting this war, and I was alone just like that. Paul insisted I get right out of the house. I attempted to explain, to convince them I had nothing to do with the money, and I didn't do it. Nevertheless, it was pointless. Eric's produced enough proof to decide my destiny. Paul and my mother watched me pack and leave the door. They did not stop me. I came out empty-handed. That evening, I drove aimlessly, believing my world had fallen. My family, the one place I considered always reliable, has turned away from me. The lies Eric had spun had ruined what I had worked for, and I had no idea what to do next. I stayed at a friend's house that evening, and the next morning I knew something that would permanently alter the course of my life. I was not going to let Eric win. My family could be broken apart by him, but I would not allow him to break me. My narrative was not finished here. It was the start of something I never would have imagined, but I wanted to know exactly how far the deception stretched and what I was up against before I could start to reconstruct my life. This went beyond only clearing my name. It was about reclaiming my life, and I was ready for whatever followed. The next several days passed like a haze. My world had broken overnight, and I felt as though I was living in a twisted dream. The weight of what had transpired followed me everywhere, though I ignored my phone ringing nonstop. Messages from my mother and calls from Paul. Nothing could make me go back. I understood they would not trust me. They had formed their opinions beforehand. Eric, he had also prevailed. The first several weeks I was in a daze. I stayed at the apartment of my best buddy, Jake, the only person I could count on amid all this. He let me crash even though I had no idea what to say or how to behave. Though always there for me, this time it was different. Jake had, when he saw me wrecked, I struggled to articulate what had happened. Paul accusing me of stealing Eric's money, the horror in his voice when he looked at me, the total betrayal in my mom's eyes. I kept going back over that moment in my head. Eric had laid the scene exactly. He had twisted everything around such that I, the villain in a tale nobody would have believed I was innocent in, was, if not years. He had been building the foundation for months. Eric's performance surprised me, as I never knew he was that adept at playing people. He was always adept at turning events to suit him and rendering himself the victim. It seemed as though he had been rehearsing for this one moment in his life. Though he had always been trouble, I never would have imagined he could accomplish something like this. Looking back, his selfishness and lack of empathy made sense, all of which were part of the performance, and I was the one who had unintentionally handed him the appropriate tools. The more I considered it, the more obvious it was that this was not an accident. Eric had a pattern. Every time something went wrong, he would attribute the fault to me, and I had let it slide for years too. I urged myself it was only a period. Things would improve. That never happened, though. By then, my mother had become so tired from the continuous fighting that she simply let everything happen, even though I continued expecting she would intervene and rectify things. Eric had always understood how to act the ideal victim. Should things go wrong, he knew just how to twist it such that I would be responsible. Should a vase break, it was always me. I ate the missing food if any went missing. I was the one who started a fight should one develop. And Eric was always one step ahead, spinning another falsehood to keep me constantly on the rear foot when I tried to explain myself. And he performed this in front of Paul, who usually sided with him. To my mother, she would remain quiet as well, too terrified to aggravate additional strife. None of that, though, could have equipped me for what followed. The day I discovered Eric had pilfered his own college fund. It was Friday when Paul discovered the money had vanished. Although I missed it at the time, Jake covered the specifics. Eric squandered his $100,000 college fund on partying, drinking, and God knows what else. He had depleted it. It vanished, and Paul went nuts. Eric, however, did what he did best, blamed me instead of owning it. I sensed something was strange the instant Paul faced me. Eric hadn't been seen all day, and I was still processing all that had transpired. When Paul barged into my room, his face flushed with wrath, and he insisted on knowing where the money was. I had no idea what to answer. "Where is Michael's? Eric's college fund is located where?" he yelled, almost shaking with indignation. I turned still. "What specifically are you referring to?" I queried, let alone how to access the fund. I had not even recognized its existence. Walking in at that point, Eric had the arrogant attitude he always had when he realized he had everyone precisely where he wanted them. Michael grabbed it. Eric continued, his voice tinged with phony innocence. "He took the money by hacking into Dad's account. I watched him go through it. My ears let me know something unbelievable. My blood flowed coldly. Eric had created a complex falsehood, one so clever, so thoroughly considered, that it was hard to see another way. He said I had broken into Paul's office, pilfered his account data, then moved the money to my own bank account. He even had evidence, man-made emails, altered screenshots, a USB drive containing falsified data that proved I had taken the money. And Paul thought every word true. With a shaky voice, "I didn't do it, Paul," I said. "I never took anything. Not even sure what you are referring to." It made no difference, though. Eric had previously checked to see if the narrative made sense. The bogus proof, the unfounded charges, all of it fit exactly. Paul's face contorted with incredulity. Before I could explain, he exclaimed, "I never believed you'd go this far, Michael. You repay me this way. I gave you everything." My mother, who had been quiet up until now, suddenly spoke. Her voice carried a lot of disappointment. "Paul, I'm not sure what to say. Maybe Eric is correct. Perhaps Michael was responsible for this, and everything I had known, everything I had battled, collapsed exactly like that. One person I thought would never question me, my mother, had sided with Eric, and it struck me like several tons of bricks. Over all those years of attempting to prove myself to her, I had never really been her first concern. Eric was always the golden child. I was simply the weight. Her eyes showed it, and her voice carried it. She wanted no more of my fighting for her. Paul advised me to get going. He informed me I had betrayed him and his family, and I was unwelcome in his house. I silently packed, my head whirling with incredulity. How had this come to pass? How had Eric turned everyone absolutely against me? Looking at my mom brought the last blow. Tears stained her face, yet she did not stop me. She uttered no words at all. That day I went carrying just a crushed heart, and I realized something else as I turned from the door. Eric had wrecked me. There was no going back. That evening I drove aimlessly, attempting to make sense of it all. How had everything gone so terribly? For what length of time had I allowed him to control me? I had only a gnawing sense of betrayal that I could not get rid of. I had no explanations. But that night, I decided while lying in Jake's guest room, my narrative was not finished here. This was only the start of something far more massive. I had my life to reconstruct. I was going to prove everyone mistaken. Eric too? He was clueless about what was next. Some of the worst weeks I had ever known followed my eviction. Being kicked out by my own family tormented me, and even now, it felt as if I was dragging an anchor connected to my soul. Still, I wouldn't give up. Though I had nothing left, I would reconstruct my life from the bottom up and retain dignity. I thus proceeded in that manner. I moved in with Tom, a buddy. He had little, but for that he provided me a couch to crash on. I was appreciative. I felt for the first time as though I was beginning from nothing. To keep my mind occupied, I worked long hours at a part-time job in a nearby convenience shop. But with time, Eric's deception started to chew at me. I would lie in bed every night, going back to the night he had stood before my family, accusing me of something I had not done. It felt as though in one breath the entire planet had turned against me. Months passed, and I was at last beginning to steady. Working for a tech support contact center, I secured a decent job in IT. Though it wasn't fancy, it paid the bills and, more significantly, it allowed me some sort of normalcy. I began gradually saving money, setting aside a little every month, all the while working to restore my self-esteem. I began likewise searching for a dwelling of my own. I was not going to allow my past to define me anymore, but life often throws curveballs at you when you least expect them. Tom received a call one day that would fundamentally alter everything. "From Eric comes it." I had no want to respond. I wanted no contact with the person who had split my life apart, but Tom persisted. "Mike, you have to know his preferences. He is pleading with you for help." I was appalled, rather than merely irritated. How could he possibly expect I would help him after all that occurred? After the deception, after losing my family? Tom persuaded me, nevertheless, to at least listen to him. Heart pounding, I answered the phone. "Mike, please." Eric's voice quivered on the other side. "I'm not sure who else to ask for. Mia is it. She is under ill. She required cardiac surgery. The physicians advise her not to make it if she does not grasp it fast. Please, I am pleading with you. I do not have anyone else." I just stood there stunned, trying to understand what I was hearing for a minute. Eric's daughter, Mia, was a small child I had never met, but had heard about in passing. Though I started to feel sorry for her, the rage returned quickly. Eric had wrecked my life, stolen from me, and damaged my family. Now he was phoning me for assistance. Like a nasty joke, it appeared unbelievable. My voice chilly, I answered, "I'm not going to help you, Eric. You destroyed everything. I'm not with my family anymore. You are the reason I am not with them anymore. You think I should forgive that? Please, Mike. It is not what you believe. I stopped him off, saying, "Save it. It makes no difference what you say. You've done just enough." Something in his words stopped me just as I was ready to hang. Not the typical attitude or manipulation I had heard from him. I heard something real for the first time. Desperate. He was not engaging in his customary games. "She's my daughter, Mike," he said, his voice almost above a whisper. "I do not want to lose her. Thank you. Right now, her sole concern counts. The only one able to assist is you." Though it seemed like hours, the quiet lasted just a few seconds. My head was a whirlpool of feelings. I lost contempt for him. He should pay for everything he had done to me. But then, my resentment spilt through when I considered Mia, his naive daughter, stuck in the middle of all this. Her mistakes by her father did not merit her suffering for something she had no control over. I couldn't punish her. I did not possess a monster. "All right," I replied at last, my voice lower now but still vibrating with the weight of my bitterness. "I'll support her. But on one condition, though." Eric was silent for a long period. His breath seemed to be hesitant. "What state of health?" he asked cautiously. "You will be speaking the truth. You will share with everyone what you did, that which you did to this family and to me. Eric, you owe it to us." Eric spoke once more at last after a protracted silence. "You know, Mike, I am unable to do that." I didn't hesitate. "Then I will not assist." Another silence descended, and this time it felt as though the earth had stopped whirling. Under his breath, Eric murmured something, but I paid no attention. Too many times I had been betrayed. Here was my last opportunity to recover my life. He would have to come straight out about everything if he wanted my assistance. Eric consented at last, albeit grudgingly. He vowed to set up a family gathering whereby he would come clean about everything: the pilfers of the college fund, the falsehoods, the manipulation, and how he had wrecked my life, all for his personal advantage. I promised him I would cover Mia's surgery's medical expenses only if he maintained his word. The next several days passed in a haze. Eric set up the conference. I had no idea what to anticipate. Part of me worried it would be simply another one of his games, another round of lies, but another, maybe tiny, hopeful part of me questioned whether this might well be the moment of truth. At last, might he own everything? When Saturday morning arrived, I discovered myself standing at the front door of Paul's mother's house. Not having been here in months, I had no idea what to look for. Still, I was about to learn the truth. No matter how much it hurt, I had nowhere to go once I was expelled. All my existence had simply collapsed in an instant. I had lost everything: my family, my house, the confidence of the ones most dear. I felt as though the floor had come apart from under me and that I was falling without anything to cling on to. I drove that evening instead of confronting the truth of what had happened. I simply needed to put miles between myself and the place where everything had gone wrong. I had no idea where I was headed. I drove until the streets were empty and the air outdoors was harsh and cold. At that point, I knew I had nowhere left to go. I thus phoned Jason, my best friend, as anyone in my line of work would have done. From high school, Jason and I had been buddies. Though we weren't precisely close, we had always had each other's backs. His response came after one ring. Though his voice was slurred, it carried warmth. Still half asleep, Mike said, "What's up?" Trying to keep my voice firm, I added, I need a place to stay," but I felt the break in it. "I'm in trouble," he said. "Come over. I'll leave the door unlocked." Quiet for a time, then exactly as before. Jason lived in a tiny one-bedroom apartment in an area that had seen better days. Still, that flat was, to me, a haven. The peeling wallpaper or the airy fast food smell didn't really concern me. Someone offering me somewhere to relax and gather my ideas made me happy. Feeling totally demoralized, I fell on his couch that evening. I woke up the following day with numbness all over. Getting the vitality to do anything seemed difficult. Although what had transpired saddened me, I could not remain like this indefinitely. I had to work out how I might reconstruct my life. I therefore started really little, very modest. I applied for every job I could locate. Jason spent hours working on my resume with me, helping me to polish it. Before very long, I received a call from a tech business. After several interviews, they offered me the post open for an entry-level IT professional. I was appreciative, but at the same time I couldn't get rid of the impression that everything had been taken away so effortlessly. Still, I had to agree without option. My lifeline came from this employment. A few weeks later, I began employment with the company. Though it wasn't glitzy, it paid the bills, and for now, that was plenty. The job was intense, and initially I felt as though I was drowning in it. Still, with time I started to pick things up. I worked from simple support chores to more difficult initiatives slowly. Though I stayed up till I couldn't see clearly and worked late, I pushed through. It was about demonstrating to myself that I could create something of my life, even if my family thought differently, not only about the money. A few months later, I acquired my own apartment. It was simply a little one-bedroom in a quiet building, not much, but still it was mine. At last, I found a place where I might breathe, and I felt in control over my life for the first time in a very long time. Though little, the win meant everything to me. I buried my head over the following year. I put in a lot of effort, picking extra shifts and certifying in IT to strengthen my resume. I was not going to let lies define me. I was trying to show him that I exceeded what he claimed. Every time I felt the need to reach out to my mother, to phone her, I reminded myself that I was doing this for me, not for her, not for Eric either, not for Paul here. But as time went on, I started to question whether my mother ever gave me any thought, or whether she regretted quickly turning away from me. Ever worried about whether I was all right? Did she really give a damn? Though I wasn't sure, I knew one thing. I couldn't let that be my main concentration anymore. I had to move forward regardless of how much it hurt. Their dishonesty cannot define my existence. I had been waiting for a promotion to a managerial post at the company, and at last I had an opportunity, after over 2 years of relentless work at my job and ongoing professional development. I was pleased with what I had achieved. It was a tremendous, major stride. I still recalled the days when I had had nothing and had been broken and confused. But right now, I had created something real and strong. I changed from the person I was leaving that house. I was also given the opportunity to move to Seattle for a new office development that same year. The business was expanding quickly and needed someone to manage the new branch. I accepted right away. I was resolved to maximize this kind of possibility that I had been waiting for. Leaving my hometown felt mixed. It was about bidding farewell to the ghosts of the past, not only of the location I had called home. I left intending never to ever be back. Jason called before I started to move. "Hey man," he began. "I wanted to say I'm proud of you. You turned things around really nicely." Though Jason had witnessed me battle through it, I hadn't talked to him much about my history. And in that instant, I understood that I was recovering my life, rather than only reconstructing it. The lies Eric had told, or the treachery of my family did not define me. I was Michael, and I was going to find my own path in life. I felt an unusual feeling of closure as I packed for Seattle. Having gone so far, I was not going to let anyone, especially Eric, to bring me back into the past. The world was mine to conquer. Ahead of me it was, and I dropped behind my former life. Funny how life seems to toss curveballs at the most unanticipated moments. The months that followed, once I severed off from my family, were a mix of doubt and will. Though the hurt of what Eric had done persisted, my life had been totally turned upside down, and I vowed not to let it define me. I started to rebuild gradually. Working more than ever, I concentrated on getting my career back on track, and I began to take solace in the little successes. After weeks of searching for consistent employment, I had hired an IT. Though not glitzy, it covered the bills and kept my head above water. As always, Jake had my back. He let me fall on his couch when I had nowhere else to go. Deep down, though, I knew I could not be a victim indefinitely. I resolved myself to climb beyond it. Every day I worked, I sensed the weight of the past beginning to lift, and along with it a quiet power I had not known I possessed. The call that I never would have imagined then arrived. One evening, Jake gave me a call. His voice was sober and unusual. "Michael, Eric is on the phone. He wants to talk with you." I stopped cold. My immediate reaction was to hang up, block the number, and ignore he existed. But I stopped at something in Jake's voice. "Why would he be calling?" Not sure I wanted to know the answer, I inquired. "It's about Mia," Jake said gently. "Mia here." Though I knew about Eric's daughter, I never would have imagined hearing her name in this circumstance. From what I understood, Mia was sweet and naive. She was just a small child, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, not like her father at all. Though I had no idea why Eric would be contacting me now, everything altered if Mia was involved. I went to grab the phone. Eric's voice emerged, frantic and taxed. Michael, I really need your assistance. Mia is here. She feels unwell. Her heart condition is said to call for immediate surgery. I'm not rich enough to cover it. Please, I really am begging you." His voice revealed desperation, and for a moment I was caught in that. Mia was young, and nobody, least of all a child, deserved to suffer because of her father's faults. Nevertheless, Eric had taken everything from me already. He had destroyed my life, and now he was pleading with me. I had no idea how I should feel. I drew in a long breath. "How much are you looking for?" Keeping a steady voice, I asked. 70,000, he said without thinking twice. "Though I know it's a lot, I don't know anyone else to ask." Kindly. I just sat there, shocked for a minute. 70,000 bucks. Eric was asking me to give him more money than I could have possibly imagined in my lifetime. I got enraged, furious with him for assigning me this role, furious with myself for even giving it thought. I knew, though, I couldn't ignore Mia. Her father's mistake did not merit suffering for her, but I was not going to simply turn over the money without some strings attached. Eric had to pay for his mistakes. This was not about only being a good man or following simple rules. This was about ensuring Eric knew the harm he had done and about advocating for myself. "Here's the deal, Eric," I continued, voice strong. "Only if you do one thing will I give you the money." "What?" he asked, obviously in great desperation. "You really have to own everything. You have to come before Paul, Mom, and the entire family and own what you've done. You have to tell them you lied about me. You have to tell them you framed me. You emptied your college fund, and your lies wrecked my life. I will help you only then." On the other end of the line, there was an extended stop. Eric's breath caught, and I could hear Michael kindly say, "You are not understanding. I need assistance. Mia's life hangs on this line here." "I know," I responded, my voice cool, "but Mia deserves more than a gift card. She ought to have the truth. You also have to do this if you wish me to assist. Lies are no longer. No more coercion." Eric's voice changed to reflect a clearly frustrated tone. "You do not understand it then. I am not calling for a lecture. I depend on your assistance. You are needed by my daughter. I will assist her, but only if you own what you did," I said, my will hardening. "That is the bargain as well. Either take it or leave it." On the other side, for what seemed like an age, there was quiet. Eric spoke once more at last, his voice scarcely audible above a whisper. "You are truly doing this?" "Definitely, Eric. I am. You are not going to have a change of mind?" "Not one. Not until you reveal the truth." Though I could sense his resentment growing, I didn't give a damn. I was going to be free from manipulation, not in his presence, not with anybody. Eric murmured at last, the words coming out as though they were being pushed between closed teeth. "I'll do it, but you better not back out." "I will hang you to this." "I'm not pulling back," I said, "and I will be there to see you follow through." I hung up the phone and felt a weird finality descend over me. Eric had accepted. He was at no choice. Now, though, I had to overcome the next obstacle, getting the family to pay attention to the truth. Among all the days, the next ones will be the toughest. I knew that facing the family, especially my mother, would hurt. Still, it was the only approach to bring everything to rest. It was the sole means of beginning our journey ahead. Mia, too? She could have the required operation. Still, it would not be free. Eric would also have to at last confront the reality of his actions. I could not reverse the harm. I could at last, though, straighten things, and that suffocated enough for me. Saturday afternoon was assigned for the conference. There was no turning back as soon as I passed through that door. Though my heart was pounding in my chest like a drum, my will was more powerful. Already I had gone through hell. Nothing could pain me more than the treachery I had already experienced. Still, the idea of meeting them all once again, listening to their justifications, and confronting the guy who had split my life apart, it made my blood turn frigid. I stopped momentarily at the door as I got to my mom's house. My fingers stayed over the doorknob, thoughts of all that had gone wrong flooding back. The misery, the perplexity, the sense of having my own family desert me. But I refused to let terror rule me. Not now. I arrived walking in. The room stopped the instant I walked in. When her mother saw me, her face wrinkled, and her red and swollen eyes from tears showed. Shaky in voice, she stood up and moved toward me and said, "Mike, I'm very sorry. Please understand." But I stopped her from finishing. I left to hear apologies not there. For the emotional theater, I missed it. "I'm not here for any of that," I answered, my voice frigid but solid. Here I am for the truth. Eric was seated at the far end of the table, his face pallid, eyes darting around frantically as he tried not to look at me. Paul was looking unusually uncomfortable as he stood off to the side. This was the same man who had always supported Eric, no matter what, but today he seemed unsure. Eric, I murmured, staring right at him, we should let everyone know what you did. You have deceived, controlled, and wrecked my life. You owe each person in this room a justification. Eric turned uneasily in his seat. Though he said nothing straight away, I could see the beads of sweat developing on his forehead. The quiet was deafening for a split second. Eric stood up at last, then, all right, I made a mistake. His voice faltered as he talked, and for a moment I considered maybe, just maybe, that he was going to confess, but I knew better than to let his theatrical performance capture me. I picked up the money. I used it for items I had no need for. You were the scapegoat I used to cover for something you did not do. I pulled you into my mess since I wanted to avoid having to pay for my own mistakes. Though it changed nothing he had done, I could sense the weight of his words on his face. It did not alter the years I had lived. He had stolen, the suffering he had set about. It accounted for none of it. Paul, who had been observing from the sidelines, spoke out at last. Eric, is this accurate? His voice was unusual in its harshness. His tone clearly expressed dissatisfaction. Eric passed him by, not looking. He only nodded. Yes, all that is true. I sensed the strain in the room changing. Paul's expression sank, and I caught a flutter in his eyes. Maybe remorse, perhaps sorrow. It came too late, and too little. I looked at my mother, who was standing there rubbing her eyes with shaky hands. Mom, I began, my voice kind but forceful. How could you let him get away with this? How could you find him more credible than me? When I most needed you, you dropped me. She began to cry once more, but I let myself feel nothing for her. No more, not following all that had happened, her voice scarcely above a whisper. Mike, she whispered. I didn't know what to believe. I mistook you for lying. You were attempting to hurt him, I thought, with a trembling head. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone, Mom, I said. I was only trying to survive, and you did not believe me. You failed even to allow me an opportunity to clarify. For a minute, I stood there staring at the faces of the people who had formerly been my family. The woman who had always watched over me, my mother, was reduced to a shell of what she had been. Paul, who had chosen Eric over me, who had never even given it any thought, and Eric, who had perfected it all, stood there now as a broken man obliged to face his falsehoods. I came here for one reason, I said, my voice getting colder, to make sure Mia receives the operation she needs. I am not acting for you here. I am doing this for her. Still, this is the final time you will ever see me. I had enough. I took out my phone and directly entered the $70,000 into the hospital account. I presented the confirming evidence to them. Not now could one go back. Looking at Eric, my voice cold. The money's been transferred, I said. Mia is going to have surgery. That is all I am concerned with. I stopped her as her mother opened her mouth to say anything. Not, your apologies and your explanations are not necessary. Enough of my life has gone toward forgiving those who did not merit it. This marks the finish. I turned with that and left the house. Not as much as it ought. My heart did not hurt. I had maybe at last let go. I had maybe closed that chapter of my life at last. Years of lies, deception, and treachery preceded me. Their permission was no more needed. From nothing, I had made my life, and I was glad of the person I had become. I never again spoke with any of them. Regarding Eric, I heard he lost his job shortly after, and his life was disintegrating with every error he made. Though it was all that counted to me, Mia's operation went perfectly, and concerning myself, I was alive. After getting a big promotion at work, I would shortly be running the newly opened office in Seattle. Walking away is the only forward path occasionally, and I had picked up that knowledge the hard way. I shut off that chapter of my life, and I at last was free,